This is still Breakfast Connect on Africa Business Radio, and Africa is the fastest growing continent when it comes to internet penetration, and this takes us to our discussion on the show today. Joining me to discuss this and then some is a certified privacy rights law practitioner. He is the lead partner of the commercial and criminal law practice, AO2LAW and CEO, Taxaide and Taxtech. Also, conveners of the Africa Data Protection Conclave. Welcome to Breakfast Connect, Bidemi Daniel Olumide.
Thanks, Bimo.
All right, so let's go straight into part of our discussion this morning. Data, they say, is the new oil. And the opinions on this are quite varied. Some say yes. I was reading a Forbes article on this, and they had, their own arguments against it, but not totally. But the statement which is credited to, a British man is probably because information is used to power much of the transformative economy and technology and the things that we see today, artificial intelligence, automation, robots taking our jobs and all whatnot. On what side of the divide are you, when on that statement that data is perhaps the new oil?
So will it be fine for me to be a centrist? I just sit in the middle. So I guess it depends on what side of the argument you're looking at it from. It's either you're looking at it objectively or you're looking at it subjectively. So permit me to say, don't quote me, that while oil might be an objective wealth, data could be very subjective. Just like oil, data is raw material. But unlike oil, that it's transformed into energy and all of that, data only gets transformed to wealth in the hands of who finds it useful. So the intrinsic value of data comes with the organization, the government, the business, the not-for-profit organization that it is handed over to. So within the context of business, your data is of some intrinsic value to you if you know what to do with them, but then it might not be useful to the next man by you. So again, it's raw material, and you get to find its value and its worth in the hands of who gets to use it. I don't know whether that helps.
Yeah, it really does. So, looking at Africa now, the continent has the largest concentration of young people in the world. And this suggests that Africa should have the most tech-savvy and perhaps digitally informed people in the world, when you consider that younger people, tend to use technology more. However, cybersecurity ratings by country, according to another, cybersecurity online poll, shows that no African country ranks above 40, and the ranking was between 0 and 70. The United States, of course, and some other European countries were in that 70th mark. But the highest, an African country rank was 40. And we have the highest number of youths, per continent. Why do you think that is?
Let me put it within better context. So it's not all bad news. Mm-hmm. It's, infrastructurally we are growing. We will get there. Current infrastructure deficit annually. You said the figures. So yes, there is a lot that needs to be put in place. I think if what you're referring to is the National Cybersecurity Index, I guess the highest ranked country in Africa right now in terms of its cybersecurity preparedness is Uganda. And I think Nigeria sits at a third position in Africa. Yes, there's so much to be done, but then in terms of both the hard and soft infrastructure, gradually it's getting into play. A country like Nigeria, in 2015, we had our very first formidable Cybercrime Prevention Act, and then 2019, we now have a data protection regulation that is gradually metamorphosing, hopefully, into a concrete data protection act. So in terms of those soft infrastructure, we are ramping up. In terms of the hard infrastructure, with a lot of work that's been done in the telecommunication space, with a lot of work that's been done with internet penetration, generally, I think things are looking up. I think what needs to be done more is in terms of the advocacy. We need to really be aware of what the standards are internationally and try to beat them. Yes, we should try to beat the international standard, particularly because of what you said. It's a very young population we have here in Africa, and transactions in the electronic space certainly will always continue to ramp up. So yes, we can do more than we currently are doing. And do I see hope? In terms of what's currently in place, yes, I absolutely see it. And I guess that's the reason why a lot of the things that are being done are inclusive of the Africa Data Protection Conclave. Is in the offing.
Because, from little experience and from trends, what usually happens is that if there is little deliberate formal information as regards something like cybersecurity and data protection, if it's not being done deliberately, perhaps mostly by government, people tend to get their information elsewhere.
Right.
And what will likely happen is that they will get the wrong information, and then they will tend to learn how to, learn about these things via the back door, which will lead to, people becoming black hat people, and, then they will learn, to learn it the dubious way and tend to use it, in the wrong manner. So I think this is, I think what I'm asking is that, government needs to be deliberate in educating and informing people, especially when you consider the number of youths we have in Africa, and then the number of perhaps I don't really want to use the word unemployed, but maybe underemployed youths that we have, so that they won't get into truancy. And we can kind of link this with even the movement that just occurred over the couple of days with SARS. Most of the people that they seem to be harassing are young people who they are accused of doing cyber fraud. And most of those people didn't learn about, penetrating and hacking people for those who actually are involved. They learned it from other means. They didn't learn it formally. So is there that gap, that knowledge gap, that information gap? Should more be done? Are they doing enough, or do they really have to speed it up? Because the younger generation is growing exponentially, and for every day they do not, put the word out, then they have to do a lot to catch up.
I think it's fortuitous that this is an entrepreneurial breakfast radio show. So I get to segue to say that in terms of the advocacy, in terms of the information, I personally don't believe that we have to leave all to government.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the space for education and advocacy should be equally filled by both government and the private sector. And I think Nigeria is taking a fantastic model, particularly in the data protection space, by adopting what I call a public-private partnership model, in terms of how it seeks to regulate data protection and by extension cybersecurity. Let's call it data security. So where in our country, at the onset of our data protection regime, government saw a need to license some organizations called data protection compliance organizations. That's a fantastic model, because what that is equivalent to a train-the-trainer kind of program. So in other words, government empower some organizations to go into the world, permit that allusion, and then spread the message. So I naturally believe that if you have to leave it to government alone, you might not get as much traction as you want. But then if government is smart enough to know that I will have to depend on the entrepreneurial drive of my people to pass a message, and to change convention, to change thinking, then that's a plus for government. So I think what the Nigerian the National Information Technology Development Agency, NETA, which is the SAR in Nigeria in this space, date effective January 2019, is phenomenal. It's a model that's really not been seen, across the world, particularly in the data protection space. And I think this is clearly exportable, to the rest of Africa as a model that should be adopted. Yes, there's still a lot of work to be done. We're numbering about 206 million now in population, and every of those 206 million people, of those living in Nigeria, are data subjects, are people whose data should be protected, should not be prone to cyber attacks, should have their personal information security in place. So there is so much work to be done, but then if we continue with this model, all hands on deck, all minds at work, I firmly believe that some months from now, it will be heard globally that yes, we have not just a regime in theory or in laws, but in regime, an effective regime, in practice. And I think that's what a lot of organizations in the data protection space, and by extension the cybersecurity space, are currently doing now with government.
So let's talk about the Africa Data Protection Conclave. What are participants going to take away from this edition, which I think is the first edition of the data? What will be the takeaway from it?
All right. What led to this really, again, is a lot of the thinking around what NIT has done. So there is an obligation on NIT for us to have some more of regional, intracontinental, and international collaborations in the data interchange space. So the data market is not a market that is restricted really to any particular geographical boundary. So and the whole concept of globalization or exchange of services across borders, which are not prone to customs checks and all of that, certainly means that before you know it, this minute, there are some international transactions that are going on where data is just being exchanged by mails, by different modes and all of that. So it's just important that there should be some sort of commonality in language in terms of what happens in your regime and how does it affect my regime. So if I have to do a transaction with a South African, I need to be able to know what my data protection and cybersecurity laws are, as well as what the laws of that particular jurisdiction is. So if I have to supply services there, by extant rules, the rules around what governs how that transaction should go and not to go should be Nigerian law, under Nigerian law as it is now. Under South African law, it might be a bit different. But then, that's the reason why we, even in the absence of a convention, like we currently have with the Malabo Convention, which is one of the thematic subjects of the conference, there should be some sort of understanding as to what really is going on. Can we transact freely? Can there be some certainty around these rules? Are there ways we could have some give and takes in this space? And all of this, all boils down to what we call the emergence or the growth of the African knowledge economy, where there is just some vast amount of trade and business amongst different African countries. So at the end of the conclave, it's expected that participants sort of know what happens in some of those different jurisdictions. What are the things they have to take on board in their businesses, particularly in the aspects of their businesses that relate to data protection or data interchange and cybersecurity. Then more importantly, what are the things that we need to do as a continent across countries to achieve some sort of homogeneity? There are a lot of controversies around what the convention says and what the convention does not say. That's why a lot of countries are yet to adopt it. Nigeria has not yet adopted and ratified the convention. But then, even in the absence of that, there should still be some form of homogeneity, and that engenders what is now widely accepted and embraced as Agenda 2063, the emergence of a fantastic or a growing knowledge economy indigenous to Africa.
Wow. So you are the CEO of Taxaide, Taxtech. Right. So permit me to ask some tax-related questions.
Absolutely.
The personal income tax of tax rate in Nigeria stands at about 24%, as at the last time I checked, and this is only higher than in 7 of the 54 other countries in Africa. And the highest is Ivory Coast, I think about 60%, followed by South Africa at 45%. Libya has the least at 10%. What do you make of this variance?
Okay, just before I answer that question, and just to give a fantastic connect between data protection and taxation, I like to say that it's actually taxation that took us into the space of data protection. Because taxation basically is dealing with people's financial data, financial information. So it's a fantastic duo because as an organization, we are entrusted with the data of so many people that we manage their taxes and all of that. And for us, it was just very important that both ourselves and the government that we interact with, what are those regime and processes put in place to ensure that those data are adequately secured. So I just needed to mention that. In terms of tax rates, I think rates are beautiful to listen to. You could do comparisons or comparison between the numbers, but I think the greater challenge really is, or the greater focus should really be hard to the base. The tax base. So in question, the relevant question at any point in time is like, how many people have you been able to capture sufficiently in your tax base? So you could decide to milk your people dry by collecting the 60%, maybe. I don't think that's an effective tax rate. And then in taxation, you have what you call the rates and the effective rates, because after you've taken out all the allowances and all of that, you come down to what it is. Under Nigerian law, it's effectively about between 18 and 19% under Nigerian law. So if you would collect 60% from a population of 5 million, we would rather probably sit at hard effective 19% and see how we could grow our base to, currently numbering, probably the workforce right now, probably numbering between 80 and 120 million. But how can we grow the base to a point where we could actually have the entire 120 million people being effectively taxed under the personal income tax regime, which you mentioned, and that is the task before government. How do we grow the base? How do we bring more people into the net? Our greatest advantage is our population. So why don't we take advantage of that population and then keep our rates as it is? I'm not advocating for a rate
increase.
I still feel that at the end of the day, even if there's an increase in the rate, will you really punish those who are currently compliant? Mm-hmm. So why don't we increase the base and let government see more revenue come into its coffers? If as of today, it is estimated that the average income of a Nigerian should be about $5,400 or so. If we use that estimate and then multiply that figure or whatever effective tax rate we choose to use for that with a larger base, then we can't be comparing our rate with the rates in all those other jurisdictions you mentioned, because then we would have been able to collect more. So I think the larger challenge before government is not to go on a competition as to what rate applies in the different jurisdictions, but look how effective is your tax administration. How many people are you able to bring into the tax net and effectively tax? And effective taxation, there's a concept of mutuality in it. So your taxpayer needs to have some certainty as to what the rates or what the tax would be at the end of the financial year. There should be some very swift, simple conversation and communication with your taxpayer. He knows his obligations. You make it as flexible as possible for them, and payments are made. But in the absence of that, I think that's where our major challenge is, and why we've not been able to ramp up our collection. And that segues back into data protection, because you need data to collect taxes.
Yeah.
So unless you adequately have a systematic process where you're ramping up your database and it becomes what you breathe and what you do every day as a tax administrator, as a tax authority, and then ensuring that those data are adequately protected, then you're yet to get into the game of revenue administration.
Now, all of this, has to do with digitizing of, the data in the first place. And, some people have complained about the duplicity or duplication of information collected, especially by government agencies. You go to the bank, they collect your data. You want to get a driver's license, they collect the same set of data, fingerprints, everything. You go to get an international passport, they collect the same things, fingerprints, everything. And then you want what's it called, national identity card. It's the same thing. It's like you're dropping the same information, different government agencies, personal places. Shouldn't there be like a central pot where you don't have to, duplicate these things? And as such, it's even safer so that you don't have your data all over the place.
Sure. I absolutely agree with you. And I guess, excuse me, please. And I guess that's what, maybe by extension, what NDPR might be implicitly trying to achieve with public guidelines, or rather the guidelines for public institutions in terms of how they manage and collect data. I mean, that's a guideline that became operational in May 2020. And NDPR, again, is the National Data Protection Officer for Nigeria. And all public institutions in the data protection space or in the data interchange space are subject to it by virtue of that guideline and by virtue of the NDPR Act, such that as of today, if a public institution wants to embark on a process where it seeks to collect personal data, both the public institution and the private organization, whoever it chooses to work with, needs to let NDPR know that they want to embark on that. And needs to get some form of authorization or some feedback from NDPR about that. Now, I would expect that, being the repository of this vast amount of knowledge, NDPR could simply say, look, why would you want to go collect this when this is already available with this? Because I'm aware that this is available.
I can understand. I think perhaps part of the problem is that, they either want to seem like they are doing, they are working, and then, there are the fees that they will collect, for doing that particular work. But the fees can still be paid, and, I think it could be worked out in a way such that we are, for example, if you want an international passport, and I don't think I have to go and do all the capturing if all that data is with the FRSC for my driver's license. I could pay the customs and authorize them. Maybe it could be like a fee, collect so data already with FRSC. But you still pay the money, and then they get to do less work of capturing,
Absolutely.
and then everybody is queuing. But that's just me, thinking.
No, you're spot on.
In my amateurish.
No. It's not amateurish. It's just commonsensical.
Yeah.
I mean, people say that common sense sometimes seems very scarce. I mean, sometimes. But I think that's why I think we all need to support legislation and see to their enforcement. Like, as a lawyer, I will tell you that the law is as lame as it's written if it is not sufficiently enforced. Enforcement is not the prerogative of government alone. It takes active citizen participation. So there is guidelines that regulates how personal data by public institutions should be managed. And once we can ensure that we lend our voices to it, I mean, you saw the onslaught when one of my regulators, the FRS, recently came up with a new directive why people should go back to the banks and provide some information, and then almost immediately it was shut down. And I'm very sure a lot of these conversations were what went on at the background. Look, we have this information. Government must speak to government. And so I think what's really been missing and what the guidelines for management of data by public institutions are sought to change is to really position NDPR as that national data protection officer that has that the power to authorize or to give recommendations about data processing activities by public institutions. And if all public institutions without there, I can assure you that a lot of the duplicity which we currently have will have been minimized. But I guess a greater challenge for even the public institutions, which a lot of people don't get to really appreciate in the data management space, is not so much about the data collection, but so much about the data validation. So you have to have processes in place where, yes, you have the data, you could have collected it from a common source, but you have that obligation, particularly when in this aspect of personal data, to continually validate the data, to continue to subject it to data integrity tests, and so forth. So rather than empowering contractors to go collect what is available, why don't you empower them in the data validation and data integrity space? Not all the data you collect is really useful for your purpose. You strip it down to that which is essential for your purpose, and you stick to it. Don't forget that what we currently have in the data protection space is that if you can collect it, then you must protect it. So the more you collect, the more your risks. So you rather strip it down to the bare essentials, that which you can protect, and every other thing you do not need, you erase it and you delete it. That's how to manage risks in a data protection, in the new or the nascent data protection regime, which we currently have, with effect from January 25th, 2019.
Now, one area where a lot of governments, even Western governments, are having issues regulating is social media. And they've been having that battle with Facebook, with Twitter, with Instagram. They collect data, they process data, and they've been having some issues, with them regulating those agencies and not having access to their data and all of that. Well, little has been, I don't know how far we have gone in Nigeria and maybe Africa, to have those conversations with those social media companies. But at least as an individual, you should be able to control, the data that you give to those organizations. In your professional opinion, what do you think about, regulating that space, and how would you advise an individual, about, dropping your data all over the place, to register just to, be a part of, those different social media companies, and they're just springing up all over the place, a dime a dozen recently.
All right, so that's the new world that was born or bettered on January 25th, 2019. The new Nigerian Data Protection Regulation 2019. It's sort of created a regime as it relates to data protection, and the first fundamental principle of that new regime is this: your personal data is your personal property. So when you give it, you can collect it. If the basis on which you gave it is you consented to give it, then that same consent, by that same consent, you can withdraw it. So if you do not agree with the principles of a particular organization, social media organization you volunteered your data to, you can almost immediately instruct them: delete my data, forget me, erase my data. And where they choose to not do that, you could prosecute them. You would report them to NDPR.
So it should just go beyond you maybe canceling your Facebook account. Maybe after canceling, you should tell them, please, to
absolutely you
wipe
can.
You off their server?
Absolutely you can. And then they have an obligation. Why? Because they have an obligation to totally erase everything that concerns you. Because they collected it on the basis of your consent. And then you can't tell them that I'm withdrawing that same consent. Data collection, there are different lawful basis for collection. Consent is just one of them. Naturally, government has collected your data because of its lawful purpose or because of a public policy, or so you can't tell government to wipe off your data because government didn't collect it on the basis of consent. But if government collected it on the basis of consent, you can also still withdraw the data or ask government, I'm withdrawing that consent rather, then delete the data. So what it's done, one of the speakers at the African Data Protection Conclave will be Mr. Babatunde Irekura of the DG of the Federal Consumer Protection Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Council, and we're so eager and looking forward to him speaking so much about the rights of the consumer, because you're volunteering your data is being consumed by those services. And if you tell them, I don't want to enjoy your service any longer, then it goes without saying. So I think that takes us back to one of the questions you asked during the course of the discourse. There needs to be much more advocacy. A program like this you have in this morning is fantastic. Nigerians, Africans, this is now a global conversation. Needs to be more aware of their rights in this space. Organizations, private organizations like ours, Taxtech is a major consumer of data as well. Needs to be much more responsible in terms of what they can and they cannot do with personal data. You can't just sell it. It doesn't work that way. If you collected it for a particular purpose, you cannot use it for another purpose without going back to the data subject to let the data subject know why. So it's a very fantastic regime, and I think that was one of the reasons why we had to develop and introduce a whistleblowing platform called the Report Data Breach, called RDB. So it's a very simple website, just RDB. .ng, R for rain, D for data, and B for breach. And if you feel that your rights have been breached, your personal data rights have been breached, RDB can lead you through the process to discover whether in truth a breach has occurred. And yes, if RDB sees that a breach has occurred, it's going to advise you on what to do. It's basically developed on artificial intelligence, so it's growing by the day as it's being used, and our hope really is that it helps in the conversation around data protection. Wow.
We could keep having this conversation. I'm really enjoying myself and I'm learning a lot. And I know the conversation will continue at the conclave.
Absolutely.
And, I think you need to expand this conclave. We need to do more with this conclave. And this surely will break the ground for big things to happen in that data protection and cybersecurity space. No doubt about that. Thank you so much for joining us on Breakfast Connect today. And I guess we will see you at the conclave.
Absolutely. We would see at the conclave.
We will see at the conclave.
Because it's virtual.
It's virtual. It's
Well.
virtual.
Yeah.
All right, this has been Breakfast Connect, and we've been talking to Bidemi Daniel Olumide, a certified privacy rights law practitioner, is the lead partner of the commercial and criminal law practice, AO2LAW and CEO, Taxaide and Taxtech. Well, with all of that, the quality and caliber of our guest this morning. Also, they are conveners of the Africa Data Protection Conclave, where we hope to see and have data protection and cyber security conversation. We need to be informed about our data that we are giving away at the click of a button, and quite a number of people do not know the implications of that. At the conclave, all will be made bare.